I'm not a big fan of like blue lives matter, thin blue line stuff. But if somebody were to say, like, well, what does that stand for? And I would say, oh, well, these are just fascists that hate black people. That's not a very good faith engagement with what they think. That's not, you don't, that's demonstrating not only a lack of understanding of their position, but you probably don't even have the best understanding of your own position because you haven't honestly heard any critiques of it. One thing that used to come up a lot in circles is like, were Egyptians black? It is unbelievable to me how much they will just get blatantly wrong, whether it's making totally baseless or horrible predictions or just having no understanding of the fact of the matter of what they're talking about. And they just do it again and again and again and again with zero accountability. They'll be wrong and they just immediately move on to the next thing.
Anthony is a streamer. He talks about current events, social issues, government, economics, you name it, and he plays video games while doing it. But he also, and this is the reason why I'm having him on the channel here, is he wants always to be right about everything. And when I say that, I don't mean that he doesn't like to admit he's wrong. I mean, he actually literally wants to be correct. And you could easily be wrong these days when gathering information. So I asked him to come on here to talk about how he gathers information. Now, he's not a historian, but he does have to look things up. What happened in the past here or there. And I was hoping that he could share with us some of his thoughts on information gathering and how to avoid misinformation. So thanks for coming on this smaller channel, Destiny. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let me ask you right off the bat, what have you learned through your experiences about the pitfalls of information gathering on the internet?
I've learned a ton. I would say that probably over the last like 4 or 5 years, especially, I think like information literacy and propaganda and fake news has kind of been like one of the center conversation topics in American political discourse, probably worldwide political discourse, but yeah.
Yeah. Now with us, I don't know. I do a lot of debunking of YouTube videos about ancient history, but a lot of the same principles apply to both, right? Where are you getting your information from? How do you know this to be true? And it's easy to be misled. There's more YouTube videos with bad history in them than there are YouTube videos with good history. So keeping that in mind as we go forward, what would you say is the difference between passive information gathering and active information gathering, and which is better?
Are you pulling this from one of my combos, or is this like a real
Yes.
thing?
No. When I
Okay.
first approached you, I wanted. Yeah. I pulled this from what you talked to that class about.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, I was just making sure. I would say that's kind of funny if it's something that other people talk about. I guess like in my own head, I've kind of got like a way that I categorize like how people like gather information, and whether information you've got is like good or bad. There's like broadly speaking, when people say that they've done research on a topic, I notice that when people say they've done research, what they really mean is there's like a podcast they listen to, and that podcast has talked about like a topic that they are saying that they've researched. Depending on what you're listening to, sometimes this can be good. So like if you listen to specialty podcasts that cover certain things like economics or medicine or history, that's not the worst thing in the world. But oftentimes we kind of blend together entertainment and political information into, this term must have been coined like 20 years ago, edutainment, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But basically this idea that people will listen to things, when I was growing up, it was The Daily Show, where people would listen to things and they would kind of like say like, yeah, this is like comedy and for fun, but not really. People were engaging with this for like their political information, like truly. So yeah, I think it's important to know that like if most of your political opinions or understandings are coming from kind of like things that you're passively being shown in social media feeds, you have to understand that there is a high degree of curation going on for that. Like you are seeing what somebody wants you to see, and it's usually something that's fitting the theme of the particular group that you're in. So you should expect that your worldview is going to be molded accordingly. If I join like a far right or a far left social media group, I should expect that regardless of the reality of what's happening in the world, I'm going to be seeing information that's going to kind of like coincide with one of those two views and reinforce one of those two views of the world.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes when we're just I get a lot of people saying things like, "Well, I've done my own research. I've done my own research on this. I know. Trust me. I have the answers." But then when you try to explore what they've actually researched, you find that they didn't really dig that deeply, or they just go to one side or something like that.
Yeah, and I've done it a couple times, and I don't usually like to because it's a very aggressive like debate technique. But there have been a couple times on stream where I'm like, okay, you said you've done your research. I'm curious, how do you do research? Let's go. And I really like to watch a person, and it's nerve-wracking to put them on the spot, but I like to watch like how do you search for information? How do you come up with like your search queries, and then how do you figure out like what you read and what you don't read? That's something that's like very interesting to me, because I'll see people do things and I'll hear them say things sometimes, and just by listening to them talk, I can already tell that their engagement with media or information is not really that good. A really good example that I heard the other day when I was chatting with somebody, we were talking about I think coronavirus stuff came up, and he started to Google stuff, and I could listen to him. He was speaking to himself as he scrolls through. And he was saying things like, okay, well, this is like Washington Post. That's not a good source. This is New York Post. This is not a good, this is an okay source. And it was funny because he was calling out, we were looking for something medically related. And he was saying that the articles themselves, like the publications, were good or bad sources. Now, if you have a bit of a higher engagement with these topics, it doesn't really matter what media publication we're looking at, because what we're really looking at is the study they're referencing, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody were to tell me, like, I know that I'm not trying to do the most contentious topics, I'm sorry, but just what I'm familiar with. If somebody says something like, I know that ivermectin is a very effective therapy for COVID-19, I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Like, well, like, how do you know? And it's like, oh, well, like my source for this is like the Washington Post or the New York Post or, Fox News or whatever. It's like, okay, that's not really a source for medical information. Like, link me the article and then we can click through to the study you're talking about. But when people just say that, I can kind of tell, like, this is the level of engagement they have with these particular topics. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar with what I do. Someone will have heard something. They may have seen an article published on anybody's website saying whatever was found archaeologically or whatever. And they'll just say, oh, see, that's what happened. But then you have to go to that source and say, well, where are they getting it from, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to go back 2 or 3 times to get to the original source. Yeah. Because people just keep repeating things. But yeah, it can happen. And but also, even when we're doing active information gathering and we're trying to be good about it, we still are biased ourselves, right? How do you remain honest when doing that? Like, are you inclined to want to find things that prove a point that you believe in? Or are you completely 100% open about, well, whatever I find, I find?
I think that this is important for every single aspect, every facet of your life. This is important, but especially for this. I think this step 1 is honesty. You should always be honest with yourself about everything you do, especially in regards to information gathering, but you have to be honest with yourself. I think that some people in their naivety will try to say, like, okay, I'm going to be unbiased when I search for things. You're not. You're not unbiased. You always are going to lean a particular way. You're always going to want a particular outcome. And I think instead of trying to be unbiased, it's really good to just be aware of those biases. So like, if I'm honest, if Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson are talking about like political or historical things, I don't like either of these people. And I know that when they're saying things, I want them to be wrong. I really do. I super want them to be wrong because I don't like them emotionally. Just it feels good whenever I can like call them out on things. But if I'm researching something that they've said, I'll be aware of that. Like, okay, Jordan Peterson said this thing. I bet he's wrong. I'm going to go Google it. But if I'm aware that I don't like him and I'm aware that I have that bias, it'll help me structure my searches a bit better so that I'm not literally just looking for information that agrees with me. Let's say Jordan Peterson says that, oh, well, I claim that X is bad. And I go, oh, I bet he's lying. I'm going to go into Google and I'm going to type in studies showing X good. That would be beyond stupid because if I have a prompt like that, I'm only going to come across the information that's going to agree with me. And I know that I'm biased against him. So I know that I'm only going to read the stuff that I agree. So I think it's good to be aware of your biases so that when you're doing searches, you can make sure that like, okay, let me make sure I'm doing honest searches, looking for information contrary to what I believe, information contrary to what I want to believe. And as long as you're kind of aware of that, hopefully you can be honest with yourself and keep those biases in check. And sometimes you'll even come across like, surprising stuff that maybe you wouldn't have known before. I remember that Jordan Peterson was on a Joe Rogan podcast talking about like an all meat diet. And like for so many reasons, it just seems like such a stupid thing, like an all meat diet. And I wanted to hop on Twitter and, attack him because it's fun to attack people and blah, blah, blah. But I'm always careful before I attack. I was like, okay, well, let's make sure that like, is this actually like crazy? So I started Googling, positive benefits, all meat diet, sustainable, all meat diet, health effects. And I actually came across a lot of really surprising information that it might be possible to live on all meat diets, but you have to eat like non-standard, like you have to eat like liver and other parts of the animal that you wouldn't normally. Like you're not only eating like sirloin steaks all day. So that's an example of like, I have a person, I don't like them much, but I look for information beforehand. And then instead of making myself look like an idiot, I, do the proper reading and then I don't tweet out something that would have been completely wrong otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you do consider counter arguments to a position that you might be inclined to believe, you've heard of these expressions, straw manning and steel manning. Mm-hmm. Do you think steel manning is important when you're considering a counter argument?
Yeah, if you haven't steel manned the other argument, you haven't even begun to make your own argument. This is something I tell people all the time. If you can't argue, I can argue both sides of any topic better than most people that I argue against. But that's like a requirement for me to understand my position. If you can't give the best faith version critique of your own argument and then have a counter to it, then you don't even truly know your argument. You're just hoping that you come up against a lot of like uninformed people,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also incredibly important because not only does steel manning an opposition argument give you a better understanding of your argument, it also shows that you can understand in good faith what the other side is arguing. Like, I'm not a big fan of like blue lives matter, thin blue line stuff. But if somebody were to say like, well, what does that stand for? And I would say, oh, well, these are just fascists that hate black people. That's not a very good faith engagement with what they think. That's demonstrating not only a lack of understanding of their position, but you probably don't even have the best understanding of your own position because you haven't honestly heard any critiques of it. So yeah, when I run up against people that haven't like critically engaged with the opposition argument to what they believe, it makes me think that their own position probably isn't very informed. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you are researching a topic, is the way that you ask questions important?
It can be. It's super going to depend on the topic. Yeah. I think the example that I used in that classroom discussion was like crime stats can be like an incredibly difficult thing to sort through because the right question is going to be more important than an answer sometimes. Like, who commits more crime? Well, okay, well, is it this group of people or this group of people? Well, okay, well, how about who commits more crime per capita? That's probably a better question. Well, but is that even the best? Maybe it's who commits more crime per capita broken down by age, because an older skewing population is probably going to commit less crime. Then it might be by like geographic location, right? Because people might be more like there's a whole bunch of questions you can ask. It's going to depend on the particular question that you're asking, or it's going to depend on the particular topic that you're researching. But yeah, sometimes asking the right question can be really important. Something that I'm sure you say that you deal with when you say ancient history, are we talking like dinosaurs or are we talking
No, that's prehistory.
Okay.
No, I'm talking about everything from like the rise of civilization to, up through Egypt, the Greeks, the Romans, ancient India, ancient China, but to about maybe the year 600 of the Common Era, and then it stops. Then it goes into medieval stuff, So anything.
Okay.
In that,
so like from like 10,000 years ago to about like 6,000 or 600.
But maybe even shorter. Maybe like 6,000 years ago up until then. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So like something related to. I imagine this probably comes up a lot with all history stuff. But one thing that I noticed, this is like a really important question to ask, is sometimes people will point out, did you know that XYZ people did like XYZ thing? And sometimes that can be really shocking. And you might ask questions like, well, did they really? Was this common? Blah, blah, blah. Sometimes the most important question to ask is unrelated to them. It might be, well, did other people do XYZ thing? And that might be a little bit more elucidating than just, somebody might point out that a long time ago, some people performed something that seemed pretty barbaric. And it's like, wow, that's horrible. Those people must be bad. But if you start asking like peripheral questions, like, well, hold on, what was the standard at the time? Like, how did most people, okay, well, contextually, now this seems a little bit different. Maybe still not good by today's standards, but maybe a little bit more common in that particular era,
It's funny that you bring that up because I do get people commenting about they have variations of like, my people are better than your people. We're talking about things that happened thousands of years ago. Like, look at these massacres that your people committed, and etc. And then like, well, what about everybody was doing terrible things. So yeah. When you read an article, let's say it's a science paper or something like that, how do you go through it? Some people just read the title and then they're kind of like the abstract and then they're done. Is that how do you read a science paper?
It's super going to depend on what the subject matter is. Because like depending on what it is, I'm just not going to be able to get through the information, right? If I'm reading
Yeah,
like
yeah,
some like neurological research paper, like, or
yeah,
there might be
yeah.
stuff that
You
I
yeah.
just mhm.
It's
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I sometimes come across where people will take the data tables but disregard everything that the scientists say. So they don't care what the
Ooh.
scientists' conclusions are. They
Mhm.
only take the data, right? Have you ever seen that
Uh-huh.
done before?
Yeah, I had I'm trying to remember. I love my audience. I'm so grateful that I have an audience that holds me to check on things like this. But I've talked about people doing that in the past. I might have even done like, oh, well, look at this chart, look at this graph. I had a PhD researcher email me, and he said that one of his biggest pet peeves were people that would pull one chart out of a study and try to reinterpret that chart based on like um wait, oh my God, I just had a random thing playing my computer. Sorry. Some people would pull like a chart out of a study and they would reinterpret the conclusions of that study away from what the actual author said.
Mm-hmm.
And his thing was you have to be incredibly careful when doing that because drawing conclusions from data is oftentimes way easier than the complexities of choosing the data itself. So if you're a layman and you're thinking that you can interpret the results of a study better than people that went through the problems of like picking out like the appropriate multivariate analysis and everything, instead of that you think you can do that better, the interpretation, chances are, unless you have a really big background in this particular research, you're not going to be able to do that 9 times out of 10. And I've gotten warned about that by a couple of people that like, unless this is like actually your field, you have to be really careful about just going into a study and saying, oh, well, like I can actually interpret the data better than the researchers themselves could. Because if you don't trust the researchers themselves to interpret the data, why would you trust them to pick the variables and do the study at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Do you think that it's well, let's put it this way. Emotional attachment to our beliefs can often prevent us from changing our minds. So, do we get rid of the emotional attachment, or is there a different strategy that you use?
So I like the, this is like this is a fundamentally deeper question about how we view ourselves in the world. Without getting too far into it, I am a human being, and there are things that I like and things that I like to do. But I try not to make these things a part of who I am. So, like for instance, like I'm a person that enjoys playing video games, and I see myself as that. I don't see myself as like a gamer, or like I'm a person that enjoys music. I don't see myself as a musician. Now, I might like flub the words here every now and then, but I think it's important to separate who you are essentially from some of the ideas you have, because when you take these ideas and you make them a part of who you are, it can become really hard to move off of those ideas if later data shows that they are bad. And you can see a lot of this in relation to the coronavirus stuff, whether it's people that got a little bit too religiously attached to like lockdowns or masking or whatever, or people that got a little bit too attached to alternative medications like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, rather than people saying like, oh, I think this is good, or oh, like I think this is an okay thing. It became a big part of their identity. And once something has been baked into your identity, it's very hard for that to become changed. It becomes like an immutable part of who you are, and it like and like an attack on that idea becomes an attack on your character. So yeah, I think you have to be really careful not to like essentialize ideas and take them and make them part of who you are. Because if it turns out later on that there is some part of this data, or some data comes out that shows that this idea is bad, you're never going to be able to move off of it because it's become like a part of you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes, in the field that I'm in, there are some very sensational type claims that come up. Like about like the technology of ancient people or things like that. The very common notion is that maybe there was a lost advanced civilization that was destroyed in a cataclysm, and we haven't, we're just finding out about it. But they had. It depends. There's all kinds of different points of view on this. Like some people think that they had really advanced technology. Some people say that it was just more advanced than what we think people had in the Stone Age. But do you find that the more sensational the claims are about anything, the less believable it is?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I'm an old. I went to a Catholic school growing up, and I was very much in my like late teens, one of those very adamant like atheists. So there's like a lot of dogma that I picked up in my very anti-religious days that I would probably apply to claims today. Like one of those claims, every growing up atheist heard this: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So yeah, if somebody's making a claim that seems like relatively extraordinary, I'm probably going to ask for like, okay, well, what is the evidence for this claim? You know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Should people focus more on who they get their information from or on the evidence itself?
Um,
Like I see a lot of people focusing on the who. Like, what is your source? If you want to find out information, you go to a good source, and the source will give you reliable information. So just find someone that you can trust. Is that your approach?
it's going to depend on. It's really going to depend. It's going to depend. It's going to depend. The reality is that at some point you're going to have to trust sources because we don't have time in our lives to become an expert on every single topic. So building up a repertoire of sources we can trust, I think, is important. Um, Once you get more into a particular topic, maybe then you can like dig through the information yourself, but it's going to come down to like how much time you can allot to researching something to become comfortable enough to like actually dig through the sources themselves and critique the researchers, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there are team sports in information gathering?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. It's a hugely team sports thing. Yeah, you can tell that like as soon as some people bring things up, like they're basically looking immediately to like, is this the progressive agenda or is this the conservative agenda or whatever? And they're trying to figure out like what side of the team or what side of the argument they should be on, just based on who's said something. Like I've had people say to me, like people will sometimes immediately discount an argument I've made, like, oh, like I think this is like a whatever, and like that sounds like a conservative argument. It's like, okay, so does that make it wrong intrinsically? Like that's not a, you're not even responding to what I'm saying. People are very quick to kind of like draw the battle lines and then
Mm-hmm.
line up on either side, and they will wholly embrace or reject a given idea or agenda just based on who they think it's
Right.
coming from, rather than the merits of the idea itself. Yeah.
Yeah, have people sometimes will say something like, "Well, you're just saying that because you're an X, whatever it might
Yeah.
be, right?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, this is something that I hear. You may not hear this a lot. I don't know, but I want to get your take on it. If you hear someone say, academics are falsifying history to preserve their power.
Oh,
I've
geez.
gotten this many times about ancient history. I want to talk about ancient history.
Uh-huh.
The archaeologists, the historians, okay, they're deliberately misleading us. Because there's of some power trip they might have. How does a statement like that strike you?
That would depend on who it's coming from for me to evaluate what is actually being said and what the claims are being made to understand why somebody might say that.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it would just depend on who it's coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually from people that don't want to believe what their teachers told them in school. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, it would just depend. So, like for instance, one really contentious thing that comes up a lot is like I'm hitting on a lot of super contentious topics. I don't know if your community normally deals with those, so I'm sorry.
Well, I
Yeah.
have people from all stripes here,
Uh,
so I don't.
sure.
Yeah, I
So
don't know
like
what they're gonna think.
one thing that used to come up a lot in circles is like, were Egyptians black?
Oh yeah.
There's a really big I'll say like an alt-right dog whistle where they say we was kangs, and it's their way of making fun of black people that try to like take credit for Egypt, and they think that's all fake or whatever. So people that are fighting on both sides of that, like if somebody were to say like if anybody were to say anything about like ancient Rome or Egypt, and it's like, oh well, these societies were somewhat multicultural, if that was the claim or whatever, and I don't even know well enough to truly know either of that. But if somebody were to make that claim and somebody were to immediately come out offhand and be like, oh, you're just trying to uphold the academic establishment, like the SJWs, blah blah, it's like, okay, well this guy's just trying to hand wave that away because he doesn't like he doesn't like that interpretation of history, basically. So he's trying to discredit the researcher, saying that he's part of like the academic institution is trying to hold down or propagate whatever ideology that they're opposed to today.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that if people want to find out more about a subject, it is good for them to watch a debate,
Um,
or are debates not the place to go?
so The way I no, I would say almost definitely not. But I
But
say
why?
that hesitantly because there might be like really interesting or good debaters. It's like debate can be like so many different things. That like debate can be like screaming matches between two people where somebody's just really trying to like, win through a whole bunch of tactics over the other person. A debate could be like a really good faith conversation between two people. So it really depends on like the debate. Like I've had some conversations that I think are pretty educational. There's been a disagreement between me and another person. They've been relatively well researched, and we kind of get into the weeds on like, oh, like this is where we disagree on this and that. Now, this is few and far between. I would say like 95% of my debates are absolutely trash when it comes to education, because they get mired down very quickly in personal attacks and ad hominems or in non-research based related arguments, just like conspiracy theory. So yeah, it's really going to depend on the type of debate and who's talking and what the subject is.
Sometimes you'll hear this is a common refrain I see in talking about debates is they'll use the expression "bad faith," okay, or disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do you tell when someone's arguing in bad faith? Are there signs?
Yeah, for sure there's signs. It's man, I'm trying to think. It's really going to depend on the conversation. Um, I normally I normally am very hesitant to accuse people of being bad faith because once you've done that, the conversation is essentially over.
So you
And
just
now you're
assume
gonna,
that you assume they're being honest and sincere in their.
yeah, you kind of have to because yeah, once you've made the assumption of bad faith, the conversation's over. It's going to become a personal attack match, basically, mudslinging. Um,
So you think it's just you should it's wise to just assume they
mhm.
believe what they're saying and to approach them in that way.
Yeah, you should treat everybody like an honest interlocutor, basically. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and then just go from there and see how that.
Okay, all right. Um, how do you make sure that your conclusions don't overreach the evidence that you've gathered? Some people go further than what the evidence might indicate.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make sure you don't
Um,
do that?
there's a lot of like random concepts I'm familiar with to try to avoid stuff like this. Are you familiar with like have you ever heard of something called like evolutionary psychology?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of something called a just so story?
No.
Okay, so this is something that I think people need to be careful of a lot. I bet this comes up in history a lot. It must. But a just so story is basically if I take a collection of facts and I try to spin a narrative saying this happened because of this and this happened because of this, more often than not, just so stories are entirely baseless conjecture. It's just what you think. And it's not actually supported by the data. So an Evo Psych example of this might be, I'm making stuff up now, right? But an Evo Psych example of this might be, um, I'm trying to think, like, I'm trying to think of examples that won't be really contentious. But I can't. Okay. Like, let's say like men have big muscles. Okay. That's true. Maybe men have big muscles and also men tend to like hunt animals in the past. I don't know if it was women and men or if it was just men. We'll say men hunted in the past, right?
Mostly men were hunters.
Sure,
Yeah.
gotcha. It might be the case that somebody might look at this and say, oh, well, I'm going to say that natural selection made it so that men were selected for to have big muscles because they were going to hunt. That was a causal thing. We needed hunters, therefore, muscles evolved, and that's the reason why. But the reality is that it's a just so story. You don't actually know if that's the case. It might be the case, for instance, that when our species, because we're sexually dimorphic, maybe in order to sustain enough sperm production to have an offspring, maybe like testosterone has to be processed in the body, and like a byproduct of that was that we grew big muscles. But maybe way long ago, maybe it wasn't the case that we needed to hunt that much at all, or maybe we hunted as groups, or maybe we did more berry picking, and we didn't really need muscles, but they kind of came as a byproduct of something else, and then we found a way to use those to do something else, right? That might be the case. I'm only speaking in hypothetical. I don't know the fact of the matter, but I'm just saying that sometimes people will take a collection of facts and they'll try to string them together to say like this happened because of this. This is really common in conspiracy theory as well. And when I say conspiracy theory, what I mean is like a baseless accusation that there's a greater plot behind the scenes that people can't see. Somebody might say, hey, here's a quote by X, here's a quote by Y, here's a quote by Z. Now here's an action by nations A and B, and then boom, there's a plot. And you're like, well, wait a second, where's the plot? well, if I look at these quotes and I look at the action of these nations, I bet that they're working together to do this or that. I was like, well, have you established that at all? Like, is there any evidence linking any of these things together? It's like, well, no, but I mean, it fits, right? So I think that that's something that people need to be careful of, is creating like these stories that you take like a mapping of facts and you try to draw a constellation between them that isn't necessarily supported by the data. That's one thing to be really careful of when you're trying to make like overarching conclusions or statements about like things that are going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That does actually happen in my field more than you'd think it was, especially when we're talking to the alternative history people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Historians, archaeologists, scientists, they've all been wrong before. So why should we trust anything they have to say? I've had people say this, so I'm asking what your thoughts on this.
Do you know who Asimov is, science fiction writer?
Mm-hmm.
He has a really, really good essay called The Relativity of Wrongness, I think. Have you ever read this?
I don't think I have.
I ultra recommend it. It's like, I think it's like 2 pages maybe. Mm-hmm. But basically what he talks about is, it basically goes something like this, okay? Flat earthers weren't really super wrong. Flat earthers were actually relatively intelligent. The idea of taking an incredibly varied landscape of the earth and assuming, maybe if we stretch this out across all of the planet, it's relatively the same plane. That's not actually that wrong of a claim, because if the earth is spherical, you only need to adjust that flat earth by a degree or something, or like 1/8 of a degree or something, to make it a round earth. So that flat earth is relative. It's more correct than thinking the earth is just crazy random hills and valleys. And then when you move from flat earth to like a spherical earth, that's something that's slightly more correct, but it's still not 100% correct, because the earth is not a perfect sphere, as some people might have thought a long time ago. It's like an oblate sphere or something.
Sphere.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, an obloid sphere or something, mm-hmm. Which is more correct. So I think that when people look at science being incorrect, I think that everybody, not just anti-science or pro-science, but I think everybody sometimes has a mistake that like science is some ultimate like arbiter of like truth and fact, when in reality, science is just a process. Science is a process by which we gather information and evaluate the world. And hopefully, over time, our evaluations become more and more resembling of some ultimate fact of the matter, hopefully, depending on how deep you want to go there. So anytime people are saying, well, science was wrong about here, science was wrong about, okay, well, why was it wrong, right? Are we on the road to getting a more correct answer? Like science, we're not always going to be 100% correct about everything. The goal is just that over time, hopefully we're making progress towards some of these more factually accurate things, I guess, is like how I would try to phrase it.
Yeah. How often do you change your mind? And do you change it more now or less now than you used to change it?
I mean, I don't change my mind too often, but I try to make sure that I'm relatively well researched in an area before I start giving strong opinions on it. But I mean, it still happens. There will be times when I do more research and I find I'm wrong about something, or I'll argue with somebody that brings up some really good points and I have to change my position because they were correct and I wasn't. So, I mean, it happens.
There must have been a time though when you changed your mind a lot, right? Because everybody's like finding themselves at some point in their life, like, what do I believe about this? Wouldn't that be a more fluid state back then? And then as you gradually firm up your positions, mm-hmm. and things become clearer, then you start to slow down?
Probably. Yeah, I would hope. But yeah, it's just going to depend on like the environment that I'm in. Like once I started to get into online debating, I would hope that I'm doing a bit of research in my opinions before forming strong opinions. Otherwise, my opinions are going to be a little bit more fluid until I've come across good data. So I try not to take a strong position on something unless I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of it. That's just the nature of what I do online. Because if I'm staking out these really strong positions and I've done no research, I'm going to look like an idiot and lose my credibility, Yeah. And it's just irresponsible because, yeah.
I'm sure though on minor subjects, there might be points where you're like, someone will bring something out and you're like, oh really? And then you look it up and you're like, oh. Okay, all right, well, I'll give you that one. Right?
For sure. Yeah, that definitely happens. But I would say the difference is like on those things, I try not to have a strong position first. I'll just say, and it's really hard it's hard for normal humans to do this. And it's even harder for online people to do this. Sometimes people are really uncomfortable with just saying, I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion. I feel totally fine doing that. Sometimes there's breaking news stuff. Sometimes stuff will come up. People like, what do you think about this? Like, I don't know. I haven't really researched any of this. I don't really know. I don't have a strong opinion. I'm okay saying that. I know that a lot of people can't for a variety of reasons, but yeah, I think it's good to be able to admit the limits of your knowledge. Sometimes can be knowing the limits of your knowledge can be more important sometimes than having knowledge, just so you don't overstep or overstate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would guess that because whatever opinion we might have is informed by quite a number of different pieces of evidence. In
Mm-hmm.
order to have a change of mind on that one bigger subject, you'd have to have a lot changed in the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas to have our mind changed about one piece of evidence would be easier because it's just one fact, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see. What if you are forced to a conclusion that goes against your deeply held values or beliefs?
So something that I tell people is, this is screaming into the abyss, but like, I think that you should spend at least a little bit, like, really firmly investigating your ethics. Political positions should be really, really far downstream from your personal ethical positions. And a lot of people sometimes will just copy political positions without really having their ethics thought out. And if that's the case, then you're going to run into issues where it's like, I can't do this. Like, this would mean that I hate gay people or I hate poor people or I can't believe that thing. Like, I can't possibly turn against it. And I think the reason why is because people just don't have their fundamentals thought out very well. I've thought a lot about my personal ethical positions. If I find out that there's something that I believe in, some like political position I believe in, and it turns out there's a better way to satisfy my ethical positions with something different, I have no problem changing. I'm not married to those political positions, you know? Like I describe myself as I'm a really ardent capitalist. And I'm a very big, like, I think market forces and everything are good. I think we can utilize these to solve problems. But if it came out, let's say hypothetically tomorrow, there was the mother of all studies came out and it proved socialism is the better economic organization than capitalism, 100% proven. I would just switch. I'd be like, oh, okay, that's fine. Because I'm not married to capitalism as like an ethical belief. I'm married to the idea that I want, the best outcomes for the most amount of people. And that's something that can be achieved through different means. The way that I say this, like, don't be married to the process, be married to the outcome. Your goal should be to achieve good outcomes, not just use a particular process because you get attached to it.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah. How do you know when you've done enough research on a subject to be
Well,
able
for me,
to
it's
draw
when
a
I
conclusion?
don't lose any debates on it. I don't know, man. Have you ever really done enough? I don't know if you've ever really. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying like, oh, well, this is when you've done
Yeah, yeah.
enough. Yeah,
Well,
I mean, there's always stuff to learn
done
about. Yeah.
enough to be able to draw a conclusion and saying, I tentatively think this.
Well, I think it's going to depend on. It'll depend on the subject. It'll wildly depend on the subject. I think. Yeah. I don't know if I could generalize that. For medical stuff, it might be never. So like I brought up like alternative treatments for the coronavirus a few times. I don't know if I'll ever say like this medication will never work for COVID-19 because I don't know if that's how medicine works. It might be in the case that in the future some research changes that. But for a historical fact or historical argument, like was Russia justified in invading Ukraine or in Georgia or Moldova? I think I pronounce this wrong all the time, whatever. But like when you get into things like this, there's probably some level of information that you can gain. You're like, okay, I feel pretty comfortable like having a strong position on this or that. Yeah, it's going to super depend on the particular subject.
Do you ever go back to a subject, or do you like once you finish and you've done a debate on it or whatever, you're like, okay, I'm done with that one. I'm not going back to it, and then you never return, or do you sometimes return to old research subjects?
It depends. It just depends on the subject. Some stuff is like very contemporary and probably won't be brought up again. Other stuff gets brought up over and over and over and over and over again. It just depends on the subject. Yeah.
Is there something related to information gathering or even debating or anything that this is a personal question that you would want to be better at?
I want to be.
Or you're like, I'm good, man.
I guess being able to go through formal literature is always a pro. I've been engaging more directly with studies past just reading abstracts and conclusions. Oh, actually, I know the one thing I need to improve at. I need to go take one of these. I need to take a stats course to truly understand like what does it mean when you cross the null, or like what is statistically significant effect size, like all of these. Like I need to take like a formal stats course. One day I'll do this online. I figure I can do it in probably a month.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I got into a video essay debate about stats with regard
Hmm.
to ancient history, believe it or not.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's a very tricky topic.
Hmm.
How do you feel about alternative media? You know,
I generally have super negative opinions of it. But I mean, I'm alternative media technically, right? So I can't hate all of it.
yeah, I guess yeah, YouTube is alternative media.
Hmm.
But you know what I mean, like the establishments that are like deliberately set up against mainstream. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I think my two biggest problems with alternative media are there's two huge things. One is I don't think you should ever define yourself in contrast to your opposition. So like if the mainstream media says XYZ, I'm gonna believe in ABC. Or like if they
mhm.
say that, I'm gonna believe the opposite of that, which is what it feels like sometimes. A lot of alternative media is like, well, CNN said this or Fox News said this, so I think it's actually this. I know this is the truth, right? It's like the rebellious teenager thing where your parents say one thing, so you're going to believe the exact opposite. I think that's really dumb. I don't think you should ever let people control you that way. That's the first issue that I have with a lot of alternative media. The second issue that I have is the lack of accountability. Oh my God. When I listen to some of these alternative media, like I pride myself generally on if I'm going to make predictions, I'm usually right. And if I'm talking about things, I'm generally like fact based. When I listen to some alternative media outlets talk about some things, it is unbelievable to me how much they will just get blatantly wrong, whether it's making totally baseless or horrible predictions or just having no understanding of the fact of the matter of what they're talking about. And they just do it again and again and again and again with zero accountability. They'll be wrong and they just immediately move on to the next thing. That's probably the two biggest problems I have with a lot of alternative media.
Do you think an emphasis on getting views and clicks harms the search for correct information?
I mean a little bit. I don't actually fault like mainstream or alternative media for being the way that they are. I think that the fault lies with consumers. I think that when people are consuming information, they're looking for entertainment first, and factual accuracy is way, 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 way. I'm not even going to say second. It's like 50 places behind. People want to be entertained, and people want to hear their own biases kind of like confirmed um, or validated, and people will search for media that way rather than looking for something that truly challenges them. It's
Mm-hmm.
funny because people will complain about how like kids today have huge problems with dealing with challenges in their life. We lack resiliency. I say we, no, I'll say Zoomers. They lack resiliency or they don't have the ability to challenge themselves. And I think that is largely true. I think a lot of college kids today have big problems with that. I think there's huge problems there. But it's true of adults as well. A lot of people don't like to challenge their viewpoints. They find the media that tells them what they want to hear. They follow politicians that tell them what they want to hear. They very rarely engage with the other side of the argument. And everything just becomes like a giant hug box everywhere. That's true of like, I think college today. I think it's true of media platforms today. People just don't like their viewpoints challenged. It feels bad. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm trying to do this on my channel. Is to get
Mm-hmm.
people to think outside. A lot of people. There actually have been several people who have come to me and said, "I once believed X, but because of your videos, I now believe Y," which makes me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd never want it to become like where because people love my video essays where I debunk other people the best. These ones get the
Okay.
most views.
Sure.
And instead of just if I just talked at the camera and whatever and told people what I thought, which I do in other videos, that's fine. But people love it when I go after somebody, and
Yeah,
I
of
always
course.
wonder like, is that good? I don't know, but they
The
really like
conflict
it.
and the confrontation is really
They
fun.
like the
Yeah. I mean,
so yeah. So it's
yeah.
the entertainment factor, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, like at the very least, we should have a responsibility. Like that's my biggest content is going to be debating, of course. Like people want to see that, but I would hope that like just don't sacrifice the your veracity of information presentation just because you want to be entertaining. And that's what I try. Like I'll debate and shout at people. That's fun for me, but I'm not compromising. Hopefully, I don't think I am. I'm compromising any of my fact finding abilities or my presentations just to make things entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I have liked about your debates is you're always the same in them. I mean, you may respond differently to different people you're talking with, but you your positions tend to be consistent across all of your discussions, right? You don't change your what you say, what you act like you believe something different just because of who you happen to be talking to, right? You're always you.
Yeah.
You're always viewed.
I would hope so, yeah. But I think that this stems from like I've got an internal ethical foundation from which all of my social and political positions come from. So hopefully it's consistent throughout like all of my different beliefs. Like if you ask me like how I treat my employees or how I conduct business, hopefully that synergizes well with what I say we ought to do in society, or how I treat people in my personal life, or how I treat
Yeah.
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 Like
You would say you don't put on a persona when you're online, right? Or do you?
um no, I don't think so. I don't. I'm a pretty
Or do you
genuine person.
exaggerate a little? I don't know.
I mean, like we engage differently with different people. So I
Yeah.
mean, like there's going to be some difference, right? Like I don't treat my, wife like I would treat, somebody I'm screaming at in a debate. But I think I'm a pretty genuine person. My engagement is pretty similar. If you meet me in real life, I'll be pretty similar to how I am online.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to start like screaming at you like we're in the middle of a heated conversation or something.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Those are all the questions I had for you. I don't know if you have anything to say in conclusion, but anyone who has not seen Destiny's channel, go check it out. It's called Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are watching me on Destiny's channel, come check me out. I'm called World of Antiquity, and I have videos on ancient history that you might like.
What do you what is your like are you like a specialist in some forms of ancient
Yeah.
history? You like okay, what's your area of expertise? I'm curious.
Well, my academic study in grad school was mainly on the ancient Near East, so the Assyrians and Babylonians, Egyptians and Hittites, all those people in that area. But
Mm-hmm.
since I teach, at the college, and I've become kind of a generalist since I got my PhD. So anything ancient, I'm interested in that period I told you about, across the
Gotcha.
world, because I like to know what people are doing over here when the people over here are doing this. You know what I mean? And I like to compare. So I've become kind of a generalist in ancient studies. But go past the year 600 and I'm in the dark. So I know a little, but I mean,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Well, I'm interested since you've been on both sides of it. I'm sure I know you've heard of the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I read this book, and then because after I read something, I like to go and find like, well, what are the critiques of it? Do people think it's good or bad? Something that I stumbled into that I didn't realize existed was a huge debate between generalists and specialists, or it seemed like, at least online, that was the impression I got, that people like that generalists can synthesize information across different disciplines and give you like a cohesive story about things, and specialists will endlessly kind of nitpick like, well, this isn't true, or you were wrong on this, or this isn't actually technically true. Is that like an actual thing in the academic world that people argue about, or is it just like an online debate, or do you have any feelings on that? Or
I think it's not like a big thing that's everyone talks about or anything. I
mm-hmm.
think it's just a general thing that happens. It automatically, when someone is who knows a subject very deeply but not very broadly, they're going to see it differently than someone who looks at things broadly but they don't know it very deeply. So they can
Mm-hmm.
inform each other, but I think definitely there will be times where they disagree or butt heads about it because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't like, oh, it's another. There's the generalist and the specialist going at it again. I don't think that really happens.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah.
um okay. You
Uh,
do ancient history. Do you find that people ask you questions a lot about ancient history that is like they're trying to relate the topics back to modern political topics, or are they mainly just like kind of history nerds, or how
some
do you
people
feel about
do. Some people do.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that because it is true you can learn from history about human nature, but I mean, I don't agree with the people who say like, well, if you study the past, you can learn the future or something like. I mean, things happen over and over again, but never in the exact same way. And there's always
Mm-hmm.
different factors at play. So you can't really predict what would happen based on the past. And also, you hear people say, if we study history, if we don't study history, we'll be doomed to
Doomed to
repeat the
repeat it.
mistakes of the
Yeah.
past. And I don't think that's true either because, I mean, kids are forced to take history in school, and they've been for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't seem to have any effect. I mean, it's kind of like when you say, "Oh, when I grow up, I'm not going to be like my parents," and then you are.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with history, with society. It's like, oh, we learned about these mistakes people made in the past in history, and then we just forget about it and end up doing it again anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think, and people have asked about this, that when you're studying a particular subject, are forces at play there that are also in play in our society, that the one can inform the other. Yeah, I think that happens.
Hmm.
And you might be able to learn from that. I don't do a lot of that on here
Hmm.
because people get mad at me if I get political.
Sure, of course, yeah.
So I tend not to, but it can be done, and there are historians who are very keen on doing that.
Hmm. What are like one or two big misconceptions you think that the average person has about ancient history that you wish you could erase from people's minds? Or do you think these big misconceptions exist, or?
There are a few big ones. One big one that I get a lot is thinking that people who lived back then were so primitive and we're so much more advanced than they were. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That they were dumb and or they just didn't understand things like we do.
Hmm.
It's kind of a conceit, but they're the same kinds of people with the same kinds of brains, and they were just as smart, and they were able to do great things. So I think that's one.
Hmm.
Because I hear people all the time using the word primitive to refer to them, and they're
Yeah,
not
to people
primitive.
in like the year like 300 or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Although
like these people had like plumbing and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and they also when they categorize them, even as far as their society, their technology, all that, they always put it in very simplistic terms, like they were just a very simple people. But
Hmm.
no, society was very complex in those days, just as complex as it is today.
Hmm.
So I think that's one misconception I would say. Um, what's another common misconception about the ancients? Um, about specific things, maybe.
Here's a specific question.
Okay.
I've already brought up a million contentious topics, so I'm okay. We'll just sink the whole conversation
Oh,
when it's. Are you a religious person at all?
I am. Well, let's put it this way: my channel is completely secular, and
Okay,
I don't. I
gotcha.
don't like to share that stuff because it's like we were talking about before. People
Hmm.
will say, "Oh, you just said that because of X. You're X." You know what I
Sure.
mean? I don't want that to happen. So whether I say I believe something or don't believe something,
Hmm.
um, I don't want people doing that. So that's why I just don't talk about it.
Gotcha. Something that I was curious about is, I guess it's not as. How long has your YouTube channel been in existence for?
I started it in July of 2019, so almost 3 years.
Oh, okay. So you weren't around for the big atheist wars on YouTube.
No, no. Although I know a little bit of some of the things that happened, but
Hmm.
yeah, my channel wasn't around at that time.
Gotcha. I would have been curious if people would have shown up on your channel as an ancient history person, asking you questions about like,
Oh,
Jesus
oh
and
yeah. Well, I
Muhammad and
still
who these
get I
people.
still get questions like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I do, I treat all of those subjects, whether it be Jesus or well, I don't do Muhammad because he's not ancient, but anything
Hmm.
related to ancient China or India, all of the beliefs that they have, um,
Hmm.
the same way. I just use the same principles, the same methods, historical method for studying them all. I don't
Hmm.
favor one over the other because historians have to be consistent across the board.
Yeah. Um, Final question. Are you public about what college you teach at?
State College of Florida, Manatee, Sarasota.
Do you
Um,
know, well, somebody in my chat wants to know if you know David Anthony, my anthropology professor in college. I don't know if he goes there or
no,
not, but
I don't know David Anthony. Sorry to
okay,
say.
gotcha. Just thought I'd ask for my
Okay.
guy asking in chat. Okay. Well, cool. Listen, anything else
I
or?
guess that's it. We're not too far away, so maybe next time I'm down the southern part of Florida, I'll look you up.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Sounds good.
But thank you so much. I appreciate you talking with me today. I know you didn't have to. There's so many other people that probably want to chat with you, but I appreciate it.
No, it's cool. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.